good, y'all? It's your boy Herb.
And it's your girl Mo.
And welcome to our soon-to-be world-renowned podcast, Young, Black, and Figuring It Out. What up, though?
What it do?
Whatever we tell it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. How you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing.
Me too. I'm not going to lie.
Not phenomenal?
Audio above.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, audio above. Yeah, I think, first of all, today is a good day. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We got an amazing episode.
Yes.
And folks were probably waiting on the what did we figure out, but we don't got time for that today.
I got time for that.
Why we don't got time for that today?
We have a very special
guest in the building.
Yes.
And this is a repeat guest. We only bring back the best and brightest. So let's clap it up for Mr. Kevin Beckford in the building. Yes. How's it going? You go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Beckford, and I'm old, black, and still figuring it out.
I love that.
I've been planning for that, Herb.
Hey, you had that in his pocket. He's like, I can't wait till I come back.
Oh, my gosh.
That was good. I love that.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Beckford, and I live here in Rochester, New York, and I work for a company called Grid Health. I'm the Senior Vice President for Health Systems and the Chief People Officer. Also pretty active in the community around anti-racism and equity work.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, and glad to have you here. I mean, even just off camera before we started talking today and off mic is just a lot of good information and knowledge. So we know that today will be that, especially for today's topic. And I think today's topic is going to be, I think a lot of the times we kind of exist at the high level and share lived experiences, but this will be things I think people can apply to their everyday life as we talk about just, we haven't named it yet, y'all, but we're going to figure out the name. But just the idea of managing wealth, right? And how do you do that well and how that applies, impacts people's life, because that really is, as individuals can do that, it affects the entire community, especially for Black and brown folks, right?
Yes.
Right. And so today we'll be talking about that, and we got a list of questions that we'll go through.
Yes.
Yeah. But so first, just to kind of kick it off, we know that you have multiple years of experience with the live as far as managing your own wealth and just finance in general on the corporate side. So maybe you could tell the audience and really us too a little bit about your background, where you started, and how you kind of develop your own personal financial knowledge base, and just even at the corporate level too.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I'll go back a little bit. So I was originally born in Kingston, Jamaica. And my dad was an engineer by trade. So when he graduated from college, he got recruited by the Bahamian government. So he actually left Jamaica, which is one island, to the Bahamas, which is multiple islands. And he was going to go to Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, which is where the majority of the people live in the Bahamas. They have a lot of other islands like Eleuthera, Long Island, Andros, and Freeport, Grand Bahama, and such. But usually they're smaller communities. They have mainly tourism, in some cases just fishing communities and so on. So Nassau was the capital. That's where all the major government functions reside out of. And so they had a what we call Rochester General RGE here.
Yeah.
In Nassau, it was called essentially, oh boy, I'm trying to think now. Essentially, the equivalent of RG&E for Nassau, and BEC, Bahamas Electricity Corporation, and essentially they provided power for the whole island. And so he was going to be one of their junior engineers, and eventually became their chief engineer. And so we lived on that island for quite a bit. He actually lived in the Bahamas right up until his death. Yeah, he never transitioned to the United States. Because of some of the racial issues he experienced when he started looking for a job here after we relocated here, and he decided that he just couldn't handle dealing with being considered not fully human.
Yeah.
So, that's subject for a whole different show in terms of what racism does. But essentially for him, he wanted us to have options when we grew up, and he knew if we stayed in the islands, we'd have to be in the hospital industry because other types of roles just weren't there. And if you got it, you were there until you died, and so therefore there wouldn't be an opening until you died. Right. So, but there was always plentiful like hospitality type jobs. So we moved here when I was 18 for me. To go to school. So I literally came here with a suitcase and clothes, like the typical immigrant story. And so I didn't know any of that stuff. I'll be honest with you. I learned in a very iterative way, by listening to people. One of my strengths is that I like learning from other people. And it's a real strength because to me what it is, it allows you to be able to watch other people's journeys ask questions to understand what helped them to get to where they were.
Yeah.
And then you adopt it, and then you incorporate your own thoughts, right? Because sometimes you can learn from somebody you don't even really like, right? Because they don't really adhere to certain principles. Like you have someone who's mean-spirited,
Right.
but they're doing something good with finance. So I can learn from that. I don't need to pick up the other stuff, right? And so for me, it was sort of a very step-by-step, chapter-by-chapter. But then what I did is as I started mentoring, I started incorporating financial, sort of advice along with mentoring around, career development stuff, right? So, and not every mentorship experience I have is like that, because there's some mentors I work with that you develop really good friendships with. And so then you get a chance to get into those type of things, right? Where mentors that you only see, infrequently, but, so you're providing some kind of micro coaching, if you will, right?
Yeah.
But then you never get into the deeper relationship. And so for me, I do have a handful of folks that I actually have that kind of relationship with. And so that's when I'm able to say, here's what I learned, but I'm giving you the macro, whereas I learned it in the micro.
Right.
Right? And so, and I'm able to then weave in the sense of how does your career advancement attach to your life planning, right? And that's so important, right? Because of the history in our country, we really didn't have a chance to build generational wealth.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'm not
And
kidding.
you mean black and brown people when you say we?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. Yeah, because so I remember, I learned a lot of the things that I learned about racial inequity in the system that created what we have today later in life. Imagine as first generation immigrant, you come here. If you've taken a psychology class, they talk about the Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
But when you're down there in the basic, where you're going to live, and food, insecurity, you don't have time for the niceties of hey, what's going on in the world?
Yeah.
How did we get here?
Yeah.
You're
just trying to make it.
Yeah, and a funny part of that is I remember one day, because we were our sponsor, living with our sponsor, who sponsors, but they sponsored 8 other families. So, and some families didn't leave right away. So I remember at one time we had well over 10 plus people in this ranch in Henrietta, we all got along, and things worked out well. But we were able to leave pretty quickly because we put together a plan, and we're able to use the money we were normally given to our sponsor to use part of it for rent and part of it for food. So we were able to kind of get a place pretty quickly, and then we got it on the bus line so we could use it to get to school, and then till we could afford another car, and then we were kind of building this sort of working our way up the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And I remember one day when I'm watching the news on our couch in our apartment, and the news came up and it showed 5 degrees, 2 degrees, 7 degrees, and I turned to my mom and I said, why are we living here? I said, do you realize that temperature is colder than our fridge? I mean, we could literally take all the food out of our freezer, put it on our back porch, and it would be colder than our freezer. She says, oh, I never thought about that. I'm like, who's the first human that came here and go everybody come. It's cool here. I mean, cold.
Right.
And so for me, I didn't start thinking about those type of things till I got to that point. And so as I went further on in my career, this was probably the first thing that was life-changing for me. I remember sitting in a shared office with 3 other engineers, and I was the only technician because my first degree is an associate in applied science and electrical engineering technology. So I was the junior person, the junior engineer in there. And so I'm sitting in there and I'm hearing these 2 white guys talk, and one is this guy that was just like me, but 10 years later. We had the same degree, and he was doing more senior engineering type work, and I was doing junior engineering work. And I heard him say to the guy, "Oh yeah, I've just got my 401k statement, and I made more in interest than the money I could put into it." And I said, and I remember signing some papers when I first joined Kodak. I was there for 18 years. This is early on in my career, and I'm thinking, I remember signing up for it. I don't know what it was. I just signed up for it, right? But no one ever talked to me about that. That never came up. None of my, my sponsors were focusing on food, shelter, get your education, go work hard,
Yeah.
but no one's talking about financial future.
Right.
And so I afterwards I said, what do you mean by that? I said, you mean, he said, yeah. He says, I got more interest than I got in the money I could put into the my 401k. I said, well, how you do that? He said, oh, well, I just put away as much as I can. He says, when I first started working, he says, every time I got an increase, I'd put it right into, I'd just keep increasing it to where, he says, I can't put in more. Like there's a limit, that you can put in your 401k that's really tied to a federal limit, right? So, and it's because the federal government doesn't want all the money to go into 401k. They want some of the economy.
Right.
So they put a limit on that. So this guy, when he was young, would put that limit in every year. And then here's the second thing. He says, when I get the Kodak bonus, I don't accept it. I put it right into my 401k. I said, oh. He said, because I live all year without it. Why do I need it? He says, people are taking it to buy cars. He says, so now when I get my interest, it is more than the money I put in. He says, I will be a millionaire when I leave this company. This guy not making a lot of money. And, and I remember I left that day, man. I went home. I started playing with my spreadsheet. I said, oh, crap.
Yeah.
So I called up benefits the next day. I said, I want to put the maximum amount, and I want my bonus to always. I never got a Kodak bonus in 18 years I lived there. It all went into my 401k. And I'll never forget where I was talking to a friend of mine at 30, and we were just having lunch, and she was like, oh, yeah, I just started putting some money into my 401k. And I said, yeah. I said, boy, let me tell you. That's the first person I remember giving some advice to. I said, do you take your bonus? She said, oh, yeah. I said, don't take your bonus, man. Like, if you're living your whole life without it, basically echoing what I heard, right? So she says, what do you mean? So I said, don't take your bonus. Just put it in. And she made more money than me. She was a higher grade than me. I said, and then put it in the maximum, because you're single, you ain't got no kids. I have no kids, nobody's gonna miss it except for me. I just gotta talk to myself about it in the mirror, And I remember at the time we both are about the same age, and she says, well, how much money you have in there? When I told her how much I had, and she told me how much she had, she's like, oh my. And she changed it. She went and changed it because I had 4 to 5 times more in my 401k than she did at the same age.
My Lord.
So anybody listening to this podcast right now, in fact, I do this all the time now. So I went on a business trip. I'll never forget it. And it was the, what's that car company that they pick you up to take you to the car? Enterprise? Yeah, Enterprise.
Enterprise?
Yeah. Like if you rent a car, they pick you up. It's kind of cool.
So,
man, I dropped some signs on that young man. He was like, I said, you like working there? He said, oh, it's a good company, man. I said, yeah, it's okay. I said, do you have a 401k program? Yeah, they got matching. I said, got matching. I said, the matching does not affect your limit. So the federal government say you can put away, say, 13%, and they match up to 13, which they don't. It was like 6%. It's not included. So you put away 13, they put away 6. That means you put away 20, and it's not your money. You get to keep it. He's like, really? I said, let me tell you something. I said, I want you to remember this moment. I said, you're 23. You're making $45,000 a year. If you do what I just told you, you will be a millionaire by the time you're 60. He says, really? I said, probably sooner. He says, seriously? I said, write my name down so you can remember who told you this. I said, but do it. I'll never know if I see that guy again.
Hey, listen, but the
point is that there are certain key things you could do when you're young.
Right.
Yeah,
that if you do it, it doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
Now, but it'll give you options later.
And so say that you about to say something.
No, I'm listening.
No, it's good. No, so I appreciate that, and that goes to like knowledge being able to change people's situations, like information changes situations, and the information you got from the person who said like I make more interest than I did when I can actually put in, like just having that information.
Oh yeah,
and how that shapes. And I mean, for you, would you say that you got like financial information? Would you say similar to Kevin, didn't get a lot of that until later on, or any of that?
Oh my gosh. So same, I'm first generation American. And so my parents immigrated here, and they
From
didn't
Barbados.
From Barbados.
Okay.
And I grew up in Brooklyn, so the public education taught me nothing
Yes.
about financial understanding or wealth. My mom did set us up with like a savings account when I was 12 or so, but there weren't discussions about money and understanding how to earn, save, and then grow it. You know what I mean? Like, I watched my parents work very hard, and I watched the stress of trying to raise two girls while trying to make it
Right.
and make ends meet. So by the time I got to college, my focus was always financial freedom,
Yes.
because watching that burden wasn't worth it. You know what I mean? It was just so hard to ask for things I might need, or even like figure out how to get certain things without adding more, on their plate.
Yes.
But I didn't know how to get that financial freedom. The only thing I had was like, if I get my education, maybe that will lead me there.
Yeah.
And like you, slowly but surely at work, my first time job, people saying stuff, and I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
But no one ever taking the time to explain it. So I
Yes.
started at a school, and they tell you to sign this and do that. And it wasn't a 401k for me. It was a 403b.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what that meant. And at some point, one of my bosses, I love him, but he said, you should be putting in more. I was like, more of what for what? What does that mean? He didn't fully
Right.
explain it either, but he signed it up and signed in for me to make sure I put in more so that the company matched more. And he's like, every time you get a raise, make sure you put in more.
Yes.
I was like, for what? And I asked him multiple times, can we maybe have like some kind of financial breakdown for all the new hires, because we're all early 20s starting and we don't know this stuff.
Right.
But the assumption I've seen is that they already think like,
Yo.
Well,
you know this.
Well, here's a reason why that I believe that. This is just my opinion. Is that within the white, the majority culture in the United States, generational wealth has been part of their game plan for years.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So that's what they talk about at
Right.
breakfast.
yeah.
And dinner
Yeah.
and lunch and
Yeah.
vacation.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have that opportunity because we're constantly fighting the battle of inequity. It doesn't leave a lot of room to talk about the future because we're worried about Friday,
Right.
right? And so to me, this sort of culture of disparity in the United States,
Yeah.
it is positioned to, the momentum of it is to really to deprive us of generational wealth.
Right.
Like that's the momentum. Like you don't have to do anything for that to happen.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly fighting. Like my white counterpart, even at this point in my life, and in fact, my CEO and I are really good friends. In fact, if I'm ever never worked for this company, he and I are going to still be good friends.
Yeah.
I could tell that already because he's just a great human being. And I've shared with him from time to time that when you look at my resume and you look at LinkedIn, I have a pretty impressive resume. Like even if I take my name out and go like, man, that's a good resume.
Yeah.
Like I've been very blessed with a lot of opportunity, and I've made the best of those opportunities when I was in it. But I have never gotten away from the disparity issues you deal with being a human being in a black and brown body.
Yeah.
So it's just a different fight.
Right.
Like when I was on the assembly line as a junior engineer, when I started in manufacturing before I got into design engineering, people treated me poorly because they didn't see a full human being in front of them.
Yeah.
How's that different than being a senior vice president, director of operations, running 4 departments that, in terms of total exposure, billions of dollars worth of exposure, where my peers wouldn't have lunch with me because they said, and this is a quote, "We've never hired a black person into our executive ranks, so they don't know what to do with you."
Wow.
That didn't come from one of my peers. It came from my manager, who we all worked for at a national bank.
Wow.
And so I got to watch those guys have lunch in our little executive lunchroom area, sitting together, my boss with them. I got to watch them. How's that different? I still felt the same, like less than. And so when you have those type of thoughts in your mind, it's very hard to get to. And it's interesting because my wife is white, and we find ourselves sometimes talking. And I said, do you ever sometimes wish you'd marry a white guy? And she said, what do you mean by that? I said, because our conversations are different. You realize that? I come home and I talk about the inequities that I have to experience when I go to the store or do this or that. I said, you know, if you're white, you would get to just like live your best life ever and
Yeah.
never think about it. Like our
regular
neighbor.
basis.
I said, our neighbors, that's what they do. When I talk
Yeah.
about racial disparity, you know what they say? They say, I don't have any time for that. I just, you know, like, yeah, that's cool, right? To have that kind of privilege. So to me, to pull that full circle back to financial is that in order for us to be able to break sort of the momentum and shift the dial of building generational wealth, we have to be very intentional about it.
Right.
And not only what we do, but how we share with each other.
Right.
Ooh, you hitting it. Because even like for me in my own like financial learning, I think about how we all have a very similar story. Because I actually, when it came to finances, like my learning was through like trial and error, and then watching what didn't work, or in some cases what did work with family, but it never was explicitly talked about in terms of, other than being frugal, like don't spend money.
Right.
Like,
Right.
say, like,
Right.
it wasn't in terms of like some of the strategies and things that you might think about doing and the why behind it, like you were just talking about. And I wish I could have gotten it. So my grandfather actually was like a wizard when it came to finances. So he ended up passing early. It might have been, I think I was like 18, but he had ended up, he was in the Air Force, then came back and like worked for a while at like the Port Authority, I think it was, in New York City, and then went on to own a dry cleaners and some apartment buildings and whatnot. And he was like doing it. They called him the encyclopedia. Like he knew what to do. He was put together, but that information never trickled down to like my mom, right?
Interesting.
So, and she would talk about that. Like, we didn't like learn the ins and outs of what to do. And so when he passed, that passed with him.
Right.
But he had it set up to where my grandmother didn't have to work after he passed. And she's still alive right now. You know, that was 2010. You know what I mean? And so, and then my father, he came from the complete opposite. Like, he was pretty much parentless. His dad out and about, and his mom was murdered when he was young. So he was surviving. So his understanding of economics was
survival.
In the Maslow. Like, it was survival. Even when he, like right now, and even when he did get to a point where he could be financially stable, it was still that mindset.
Oh, yeah.
And so for me, I'm just watching the things not happening. So by the time I get into my first role, because you're in that state of survival, I don't know what's happening. So the same thing. People talking about 401k and 403b, and I'm just signing papers. Right? All right, sounds good. We're gonna make this happen. Like I don't really know. And then even the things I wish, like going through like school and student loan debt, which is crushing people. Right. I'm like, these talking about refund checks?
Ooh, I remember.
Oh, cool. I'm gonna take out these loans. I'm like, I can take out these extra loans and I get $3,000-$4,000 back, not knowing by the time that comes back to you in the form of student debt and the interest on that, crushing.
Right. And you're just signing away promissory notes and
unaware. I'm just doing whatever it might be. And so then the other element, and I think this is where this could be the question you want to get back to you, of how to like manage that, is then when you do get in or start to get into places of like prominence, especially in the Black and brown community, where I was watching this show called Explain, and they talk about how the wealth gap, racial wealth gap for Black folks in particular, if we graduate to the same degree, so comparable degree, comparable time, comparable industry, and then similar student loan amount debt, you'll see that we will take longer to pay it off, and will end up not have the same level of finances as our white counterparts. And for many reasons, one of those is that typically we don't have the networks that our white counterparts do. And so we are like the folks who are helping out the family. It's like, I'm living that in a way right now, right?
Yes.
And so it's like navigating that, and I know that we had talked about some of that too. Just advice on how do you navigate that, especially for like brown folks.
So I tell you something. This is, boy, I'm so glad you brought this question up, because it is one of the single most barriers for success. Because, and particularly as a first generation immigrant, you really get this too as well, is that you there's a general feeling that it is no value in you being successful and your family not being successful. Like that don't even come in. I'll never forget when I graduated. Most of my friends that were American, they go like, "Oh man, you were going to Kodak. You're going to get your own apartment right now. You can live, because I'm going to go from $0 a week to like at the time it was like $411 a week.
Yeah.
My first paycheck, because I never forgot that number.
Yeah.
So don't seem like a lot right now, but back then, 30 years ago,
You're balling.
it was good money, And so I remember, and I'll never forget it. She's like, "So you're gonna do that, right?" I was like, "No." I said, "Why would I do it? I'm gonna save up some money and buy a house." I went and met with a real estate agent as soon as I got my first paycheck and said, "How do you buy a house in America?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Well, like, how does this work? Like, talk to me, because I don't even, And I was like, and I've always had this dream of building a house. I want to build a house, move the whole family into it. That becomes our launch pad, so we'll keep our costs low, and everybody takes off from there." And I'll never forget it. Marty Reagan was her name. God bless her dad. I think she's gone now. And she says, "Well, you want to build a house and move everybody into it? That's going to cause problems for you." I said, "We all live together now." I said, "What kind of problems you talking about?" I'll probably have my accent. I'm like, "What kind of problem you talking about, man?" So my accent was a little heavy back then. She says, "Well, what if you meet a woman and how's she going to like the fact with your family?" I said, "Why would you have a problem with that?" I said, "It's my family. They're going to see them anyway.
Right.
It'd be easy for them to see them because they'll be in the same house. They're not going to visit them. They come to me."
Yeah.
She says, "Well, if you marry an American woman, I don't know if they like that." I said, "Oh, why?" And I'm like, "Why?" She said, "We don't like our families all living in the same house." I said, "All right, well, let's cross that bridge when we get to it."
That's real.
So I got to tell you, I'll never forget my friend saying to me, well, why wouldn't you want to leave? I said, I was in my room on Friday before I started this job, and I'm in my same room on Monday. My room looked the same to me. The bed just as comfortable.
Yeah.
Everything. I said, so what's the rush? Like I said, I don't feel any compelling need to go and sign a lease with somebody and rent from someone when I can stay here, pitch in to help the family, buy a house that we own.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I spent 18 months saving. I paid myself $25 a week out of $411, and I saved up enough to be able to buy. And by the time I went to buy, Marty Reagan was really great. She says, "Kevin, you should buy a double house. Move your family in one side, and then you have the other side, because then you'll have a sense of, your own space."
Right.
I was like, "What is it? Is the cost more?" She's like, "It's actually cheaper." Because the house I was going to build was going to be like maybe $80,000. I was able to buy a double house in the city for $60,000.
Beautiful.
And so I bought my mortgage payment was $461.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. $461.
Blessing.
Right? And so I was able to move into that house, and so now our whole cost structure, by the time I bought that house, we were paying about $700 a month for rent. And we went down to $461 for a mortgage. And then all our families in one house.
Nice.
And so we start working on my brother-in-law. She got married, and I turned his room into an office, and I started doing some consulting work. It basically just took what I learned from Kodak and helped small companies, and they would pay me. And then what I did is, because I didn't know anybody, I didn't know what it cost to do that work. I came up with my own. I'm like, listen, I said, what are my needs? I want to get a regular paycheck.
Nice.
That I said, so I'm already working full time, so that's providing all of my needs. So I came up with a retainer, which is essentially I learned out later on is what lawyers do, right? So I took a small company that says, well, we need you to help us with this and that. I said, well, you pay me $100 a week, I'll do all that stuff for you.
Beautiful.
Right? And then that $100, I really now. Normally, like I was doing some more work to get to that point, but that was my own time. So then I have at one point I have 4 companies I was doing that type of stuff for. I took all that money for that and helped put my sister through college.
Beautiful.
So my sister got her degree from Brockport with a major in finance, minor in accounting. Didn't know a penny to anybody. All right, and by that time she got done graduating, I was like almost dead because I was working 18 hours a day. So I shut it down. I didn't. Now, if I was smart, I might have been able to, maybe turn it into a business because it's a good concept. But the thing is that at the end of the day, I was doing things based on need. I look back at it now, and there's some method to the madness. So when I provide that coaching today for somebody, I'm giving them the macro of what I learned in the micro. And so at the end of the day, the biggest thing we can do is to surround ourselves with people who have that knowledge, who are willing to share with it. And so what I try to do now is I have a couple of resources in my network that when I'm working with a mentee, I'll say, here's the person you want to talk to. That's what they do for a living,
Yeah.
right? So I know a little bit, they know a lot,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, and I know enough to tell you that this person, if you talk to them, they will help you to build generational wealth.
Right.
And so, and one of the things that's really important, particularly, so the first step I would say, again, I'm not a CFP, so I need to put that disclaimer out there. I'm not a certified financial planner, sorry. If you're a young person today listening to this podcast, literally when you get done listening, log into your assistant at work and say, do you have a 401k that you participate in? If you are, maximize it. What is the maximum amount that you can put in? And if you're not sure how that looks, then you just put a little bit in, change it, increase it, see what your paycheck looks like. Because what you'll find is that when you put more money into a 401k, your taxable income goes down. So you actually pay less taxes. So if you think you're putting in an extra $100, you're really only putting in an extra 70.
Right.
Because you're not getting taxed on that.
Right.
And so if you play around with it, but the bottom line is your goal should be get to the point where you're putting away the maximum. Because what that does, if you have matching funds in your company, you get that free extra money.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once that's the first thing to do, because to me that's minimum, meaning that you basically take money you're making, putting it away in your 401k so it's not taxed, and then you're able to then work with the rest. And the next thing would be around your debt. If you have like 4 or 5 credit cards, what you do is you take a look at all of them, because that can happen over time, right? Take all of those 5 cards and you say, okay, make the minimum payment on all of them. Make a decision not to use credit anymore if you can, or if you do, pick one card, the card that has the highest balance, and hopefully that has the best interest rate, but the highest balance. So to say, all of my other cards, I'm going to pay minimum on everything. And if I need to use credit, which I'm going to try not to, only use that one with the highest. And the reason you're doing that is because you don't want to get too close to the limit.
Right.
And then what you're doing is that once you're done with your budget, you say, okay, I paid the rent, I paid everything else, I'm paying minimum on all the cards, and then I have extra money left over. You put it on the card that has the lowest balance. And then when you pay that off, you take that amount you were putting on that card plus the payment for that card, and you throw it on that next card that has the next lowest balance. And then you just keep doing that till they're all gone, and then leave yourself with just 2 cards.
Right.
One, and the reason I say that, 2 different. Just because if you're on a vacation, you're somewhere, and something happens and a card's compromised, you got to back up. So, but the general thing is you want to keep them both at 0 if you can. And so then you have the credit available so that if you need it in a jam or something bad happens, but to try to operate with no credit card debt.
Yeah.
And then when you're ready to buy a house, you have money to put down. You buy a house, you have a mortgage payment. And a car payment, if you need to have a car payment, just make sure you get a car that you can keep for a long period of time. So that after you buy it, you reach a point where it's paid off for, and then you float for a little bit. So like the car I drive today is 12 years old. I had a car payment, but I paid it off 4 or 5 years ago, and I have no car payment. But at some point, I'll have a car payment when I'm ready to have it. But you have this period of you buy it, enjoy your car as you drive into work in every day. And then you have a period with no car payment. Then what you do is that what you used to pay in a car payment goes into your savings account, because that's the money you're going to take to buy the next car.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yes, I think snowball effect in this. Like you like the snowball. I think somebody categorized that at once. Like you take that. Okay, that's good. Yeah. So
it's a pretty common. That's not a Kevin thing. That's actually, in fact, David Ramsey is the one I heard it from like 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, that's good. No, thank you. But it's common. But for folks who don't know, this will be first info. So thank you for that.
Right.
And I did. But first, you got questions and thoughts before I get to these?
I mean, that was way earlier. Just about how do you think gender plays a role in this? Because from what I've noticed, the expectation is not necessarily for women to always do these things, and you're almost like expected to marry or find some man and attach to him, and then he handles all these
I am
things.
so glad you said that, because remember when I mentioned that the conversation they had with my friend?
Yes.
All right, so I remember back then we were talking. She said, "Well, I'm probably gonna get married to somebody who's doing this stuff, and it's gonna happen." I said, "Can I offer a thought on that?" I said, I said, the reason why I work so hard to make sure my sister finished her education, I said, because there was a point where she was not going to be able to do it financially. And I am her brother, I'm not her dad. And I was like, all right, well, I don't want that to be a barrier for you. I said, I want you to be able to have your own degree, so you can have your own career, so you can save and do everything you need to do. I said, because if you don't get married, what are you going to do?
Right.
And if you get married, who's to say you can get married to somebody who's financially astute? They may have issues.
Right.
You may love them, but they may have issues. So you want to make sure that you got that covered either way. Now, here's some irony. The person that I had given that advice to that ended up changing it, to this day, they never got married, and they're doing well financially.
Wow.
Like super well, to the point where they have like real estate holdings and stuff that they took the money from that, and they now have real estate holding multiple properties and so on. And so I think it's really important for women to say, at the end of the day, it's a responsibility. So here's the nice thing, is you can't lose, right? Because you happen to marry a brother that's doing the same thing, then you're going to be good. You know, you both get your stuff.
Both on point.
Yeah, you know,
the whole family is put together.
And I would say, you know, like when you're in the dating stage, it's okay to ask them some. I won't sound like a comedian here for a minute. Like, what's your credit score look like?
Hey, for real. Listen, that's the question. Credit score. How much? What's the debt ratio that you got going on?
I know, and I'm not saying it's okay to love somebody that got some financial issues because their journey may have put them there. But I think it is important that before you get married, you talk about that. So so when you're going through that sort of dating stage, you want to get to know each other, to say, well, how are things going, financially for you. You don't have to give them the whole store, but to say, because for example, why that's important. Because when you get married, you may decide who's going to handle what.
Right.
So you do not want your partner handling your finances if they don't know how to do it. And there's no shame in saying, I don't know how.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's okay to so I'm not suggesting, marry somebody like, oh, I love you, but, you got a 235 credit score. That's not going to work. I don't mean that. I'm.
You're saying partnership.
It's a partnership to say, well, how'd you get there? Now, if it's like, hey, life circumstances, medical expenses, you name it, or they may say, it's just not my thing. I'm like, it's mine. So how about this? Part of our agreement when we get married, like there's certain things you do, I do, and so we will have like, our, monthly meetings as a family to talk about finances, to see like how are we doing, how are we not doing. But have the person who has the strength in that area to do it. And if they don't, then you find someone outside the family to help you with that.
Right.
So that's where you're getting like an accountant that you can work with that will help you to sort of like keep you on task. And so, or, you can look for companies that can help you with that, and
That's good. And so this is great. So I'm just going a few points that I want to bring up to say, hey, here's some gems that we got for us to do.
By the way, you don't want me to mention something too, by the way, this will help you, by the way. So if we feel like we have more to talk about than one podcast, you could have like a series where we talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm about to say we might do
Oh, you're coming back.
Yeah, I would love to.
We might do this next episode.
Because you know what? As I'm talking to you, I got like stuff that's queuing up. I'm going like, don't say that. We don't have enough time.
We can run this back. This
I'm
gonna
here
be
for all of it.
Yeah, we're gonna need this. We're gonna class, y'all. So and thank you. This is like free game right here. Thank you. We appreciate you.
We deeply appreciate you.
So so this is what I heard. And more questions, but I just want to summarize what we heard so far for the folks to take the gems with them. So put that bonus and the increases into that 401k. Well, first know what a 401k means, and it's like we got a 403b or what you have, see what they match in, understand all of that, and then as you get increases, put that away so they can set you up for the future. Definitely got that. And then I really liked, and maybe you can help me know if this is what you were saying, but you would recommend having a certified financial planner, someone who does this for a living.
Absolutely. And why that's important is that's how you put together a plan for generational wealth.
Yeah.
Right? Because that person is kind of your financial coach.
Yeah.
That no matter where, and this is really important because most of us here today that are listening to this podcast are going to be working for different companies over the course of your life.
Yeah.
So some people say, well, I'm not going to start up a 401k because we may not be here that long. You still do it. Why? Because guess what? When you leave, you then take that 401k and you move it in. So your financial planner has access to resources. So for example, to say you're going to open up an IRA with them so that therefore the minute you move from your first company, you work with them to roll over all those funds into your IRA.
Yeah.
And then you move to your next company, you do it again. And so you may have worked for 5 companies, but guess what? All that money in their 401ks are in your IRA.
Right.
And so you're essentially consolidating your retirement plan, and then you're able to meet with your meeting with a. In fact, I just got my message from mine last week that says, "Hey, Kev, it's time for us to meet. We meet once a quarter, and we'll go over what's been happening, in the stock market." and with mutual funds and stuff like that. And so, and you get to know them and they get to know you. And so for me, I'm okay with being a little bit sort of, mild risk. I'm 58 now, so I don't want to be too risky. But I also know that the stock market continues to go up over time. So mutual funds, may be where you put certain things that are safe. So I want to have enough cash available that when we see like everybody's crying, oh my gosh, it's down. I said, go move over, get some, and then wait, and you ride it on up, cash out, back into cash, wait. Yeah. So you have a small portion of your portfolio you do that with, and that helps you to hedge against periods where there's low interest rate growth over time. But you get creative like that when you have a CFP that's helping you with that. And so and they help you to put together a plan, and then at some point you start talking to them about what happens when you die, what happens to the next generation. So if you never have kids, that's okay. You may just decide like, hey, you could put something into like a foundation that continues in a trust after you're gone, so that you continue to create change in things that you want change in.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, or siblings and family and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Me too, like, hey, I'm thinking about it.
Yes, and like take all those notes because
because
and it's on the podcast.
Yeah.
You got it. So to me one of the unique challenges we have, particularly as marginalized groups, is that we have many relatives that have needs. My white counterparts, they don't talk about their family problem. Like, they go like, oh, who you helping your family? Like, who you helping what? And I'm not being, wrong. I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm saying that within the white culture, because everybody has their own stuff. Yeah. I mean, and the evidence is compelling, right? Yeah. White families have, something like 200,000 in terms of like family equity compared to 12,000 for black people. So therefore, they don't need to help each other out as much. Now, they got some poor cousins and poor relatives, but they pray for them, right? Yeah. Whereas we don't just pray, we give them money. Yeah.
We pray for them.
We don't just give them thoughts and prayers. We give them thoughts and prayers and $100.
Yes.
And so therefore, I would have more money today if I had taken that approach. But because moralistically, as a human being, I can't do that.
Right.
So for me, I made a conscious decision early on in my 20s and 30s and 40s that I would much prefer to help people that are in need than my family that are close to me that didn't have some of the same benefits or had some medical issues that affected them. And I'm okay with that because you know what, how much is enough?
Right.
So I've made a conscious decision that I would prefer to have less money when I'm in my retirement if I could help out families that are there. So we'll never not have that, at least for us. Maybe for the next generation will be a little bit better. But I just think if I'm going to live, I'd prefer to live that way than to where I have some of my white counterparts that, they don't have to worry about that because they don't have family members that need as much.
Yeah, and just to back this up, because, sometimes people refute that and they'll personalize what you just said and say, well, I had to just get the stats. Based on the Federal Reserve, this is the bank coming forward letting them know that 60% of black households hold less than $49,000 in wealth compared to only 28% of white households. And so what you're saying isn't anecdotal. This is proven. The data is there.
Oh,
and so when you like you said, when you're in a space where you don't have to pay for them, but you can just pray for them. That's a different level of conversation than what's going on all the time.
Well, they're not affecting their plan.
Right. They don't have to be factored into the plan.
I've had to, there have been times over the years where I've had to take a decent money out of my own plan, my family plan, for me and my family, to help someone that I knew that needed it, and if they didn't, they wouldn't have been helped. And so, sitting down with my wife and talking through that, at first, in the beginning, when we first got married, she wasn't used to that. And so, and I made it really clear, before I even proposed, I said to her, I want you to know, as a first-generation immigrant, this is your time to walk away from me. I said, because, we came to this country with nothing. My mom, even though she's working, she's working a pretty low-wage job. She doesn't have a 401k. She doesn't have, a lot coming from Social Security. I said, and I will not allow her to live in poverty when I'm not. I said, so two choices. And there's a third, but the two choices is either I buy a house that's big enough that we all live in it, I buy two houses in the same neighborhood. So it's easy for her to see us and us to see them. Or the third option is we just stop. We don't go any further as a couple because I love you, but I will not I can't have a partner that doesn't support me being with my family,
Right,
supporting
right.
my family.
So that's you talking my language. Yes, we over here getting fired up with these conversations. We done, thank you. Listen, we got to do this in series. By the
Oh,
way.
no
Literally.
worries, no worries, no worries.
And I got a couple more questions, but did you want to add to what you?
Yeah, so she said yes. She said, I love your mom, and I just prefer us to have one house. So that's 20. You know, we've been married for 20 years.
Wow.
And we had this conversation. What, you know, you're 23. You know, and so that's what we did. And so it allowed me. So so think about what that meant, though, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm single. I had a house that I bought for $60,000.
Yeah.
That had a mortgage payment that was less than, you know, what my car payment was like years later. And then in order to sort of buy that house to accommodate making sure my wife was comfortable with it, I ended up going from that house to a house that was more expensive.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore my costs were more in my 20s and really in my 30s than it needed to be, because I wanted to make sure my mom always had her needs met and felt comfortable, and it was a way to say thank you for coming to a new country, and knowing after we got here, her husband was not going to come, and decided to stay with us instead of going back. And so I probably have less money today because of being able to do that, but I'm okay with that,
Right.
because that was a life decision.
Yeah, it's the social context of that, where I remember I was talking to somebody and saying how a lot of me growing up, a lot of the black boys in our neighborhood, like there were like 3 dreams that I like can map out that we all have. And one of them was I want to buy a house for my mom, right?
Yes.
And when you think about that, and like the reason why, when I kind of unpack that, it's because a lot of us were in situations where we saw the struggle, and we saw how much had to be done in order to get where you were. And people might look at it who maybe don't have that same struggle to say, like, why would you factor that into your plans or whatnot? It's like, you don't understand. It doesn't even feel like something I'm choosing to do. It's a must.
Right.
Yes.
Like, there's no other alternative.
Yes.
And based on what I'm doing, for 2 reasons. One, what you saw folks go through at the time and this allegiance to my family, because I'm navigating that now.
Yes.
So where it's like, I can't. And then secondly, if not you, then who?
Right.
It's like, who would do that?
Right.
And yeah, like that, and that burden of that weight that you almost carry, that is amplified in the black and brown community. Like us talking about that it's just so hard to navigate, because even this other stat, like this is fascinating to me. In 2019, the median white household held $188,000 in wealth.
Yes.
The median white household. That's 7.8 times that of the typical black household, which is around 24,000.
Yes.
And so if you think about that, if you make it out, it's not just, if you think about me in a way, right? It's my family. It's people who I call family, friends.
Yes.
It's like that becomes this thing that you have to implement into your plan. I never framed it that way, the way you did.
Right.
But that was so powerful for me. It's like, it's a part of your plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, yeah.
In fact, I would say when you sit down with a certified financial planner, those are the things you talk about. To say, I want to plan for me, but also I want to plan for how I help the family.
Yeah.
Right? And it could be in short ways, long ways. So, for example, if you know that you'll be able to, you know, like your 401k is kind of like table stakes, right?
Right.
You know, bonus if you get one, table stakes. You know, moving over to IRA, table stakes.
Yeah.
But then you're going to reach a point career-wise where you're making more money.
Yeah.
Then you can put in that 401k.
Right.
And you can certainly put someone in like a Roth IRA, which is, you know, tax going in, but then non-tax going out.
Yeah.
But you also want to do other things to say, well, you know, what can I do to use my position and agency and power from a financial perspective to help the family move them forward. Right. And so there are some family members you help in ways that you may not give them money directly, but you can help them. Like, so, and I'll give you a small example. So you could have a relative that maybe has a job, likes the job, but they don't make enough money to maybe afford like a reliable car. Right. And so what you can do with them, say, okay, well, if they're able to, you know, you work with them, say, okay, what can you afford? And this they'd have to allow you to help them, right? To say, okay, well, I'd like you, first of all, you want to make sure they have good housing and a car to get them to a reliable job, right? And so if you feel like you have the headroom to do this, you could say, like in one example, I had a relative that I helped, a distant relative that I helped with this, where they had a job, and I was able to, over time see that they were consistent in going to that job. And so that, they had the discipline and they had the follow through. So there wasn't a work ethic issue, right? But the job didn't pay much because of the situation that they're in. They were, it was limited in terms of what they could make. So what I did was say, okay, well, but the problem is they were spending like 5 hours to get on the bus every day to get to that 8-hour job. 5 hours.
My Lord.
Some of it's like waiting and, connections and so on. So what I discovered is, well, boy, if I can get them a car that's reliable, it'll take them 20 minutes to get to work.
Right.
What would that do to their quality of life? Right? So then I made a decision to say, okay, well, if you would allow me to, I'll work with you. Let's go and sit down to say, what would it take you to lease a car?
Yeah.
Right? Because payments are lower. Back then, they're lower. And what can you afford? And then they were like, well, and they're like, okay, this. And I said, and at that time, they could afford a third to half of the payment. I said, I will subsidize the other half. So I said, and I didn't give them the money directly. I signed up and sent up, an automatic payment from my bank to go to their account at that deal, that sort of, place. And I did it before they were billed. Because, and the reason why this is important, because the way leases work, lease is basically like a rent payment.
Yeah.
So if you had a 1-year lease at $100 a month, and then you start out and you put in $1,200, you will get a statement every month that says 0. So if you put in $50 a month before you get billed, you get a statement that says $50 a month. So that's the reason why I picked that vehicle, because that means that I can, with a leased car, prepay their lease before their bill. So when they got a bill, they saw an actual bill that they could afford.
Right.
And did that for the whole 3 years. And then before they were done, we sat down and said, okay, well, what is the residual to buy that car? It was X. What would it cost if you were to buy that same car again? And it was actually more expensive to buy an existing car in the lot because the residual was lower. I then worked with them to say, okay, well, now take out a 6-year loan to pay off that. Your payment was the same. And then now you don't need that residual. So they now own the car.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right? So it was a very specific way.
Yeah.
Another way, and these are creative ways, right? These are actual examples. I had another relative that was in not the best of areas and was paying higher rent because, and that's a whole different show we should talk about around what management companies do, where you can have no more than 35% of your income in the suburbs, but you can have as much as 60% of your income go towards rent. It allows them to, because they know you're trapped, because you can't go to the suburbs. So then on their application, they can charge you $900 a month for an apartment studio that would only be probably $750 or less.
Wait, explain that again. What can happen?
So, so in other words, applications for rental apartments. If you go to rent in the suburbs today, same management company would say that, when you fill it out, your rent can't be more than 35% of your income. That's an indirect way of saying you need to be making over $60,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And what they're doing is they're using income to create a barrier that exclusion. And so who's disproportionately affected by lower
So this
income?
is whites only without whites only.
A lot of rental companies are doing this. Right. So all right. So the opposite, same company have properties in the city that will allow up to 60%.
Wow.
And what that does is that allows them to, first of all, you can't go there, and you're going to be here. That allows me to charge you more for rent.
Right.
So I had this relative that was paying almost $1,000 a month for like an apartment in the city that was not being taken care of, or because another thing, they don't take care of it, right? Because they got a trapped audience. It's no different than what happened back in the day, right? Redlining stuff. Yeah. So I discovered that person could move to the suburbs and pay almost $300 less per month for a 2-bedroom instead of a studio in a bad neighborhood that was not just well taken care of, but also it also had more amenities, right? 2-bedroom, nice neighborhood, had a carport, all that good stuff. And so in that case there, what I did was I said, okay, once we demonstrated that, okay, you could live here, so if we eliminate some of your bills, so your income's available to be able to, because you're doing it today, so it's actually going to go down. then I found a way to subsidize that transfer. I actually paid for their move.
Yeah.
Filled out all the got furniture. I mean, they didn't have any furniture, right? And then I was able to then invest into saying, okay, I took them shopping and got them a whole house full of furniture. And then now they're in a nice, 2-bedroom apartment in a nice area, and it's limited, right? So therefore, you're finding creative ways to help that changes their situation, improves quality of life, and now they're in a better position. I mean, it doesn't solve everything, right? Because down the road, that person may not be able to afford in retirement, like their retirement's going to be different. But what am I doing? I'm already planning for that. I sat down with my wife and said, listen, I want you to know when we retire, I want to help this person. I'm not sure how yet, but I want to make sure that I can't enjoy quality of life with them not having it. Even though they certainly have their responsibility, but I want to mitigate certain basic issues where I don't want them to ever be in a homeless situation. I don't want them to be in an lower quality of life. And so I'm already coming up with ideas. I'm going to be working on how to help them. And so that was my way of saying, in my financial plan, it doesn't mean it would exclude people that need help long term.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect sense, especially since I think how you found similarity in wanting to like buy a home for your mom or like take care of your family.
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing for me ever growing up. And I think me being in a position of the youngest, but also being a woman.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
My dad is not taking. I was blessed to have my dad in my life growing up all the time, and so even now he's not taking money from me. He will never. It's not a thing. I have tried to help in any way I can, and he's like, money? No, I'm fine. Even if he ain't fine, I will never know. So I mean, if he could pay my phone bill or anything now, he would, but I won't allow him. My goal was to not be a burden on them.
Oh.
But hearing everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, because now as they're much older, my goal will be to make things easier for their retirement, like give the education and any sort of guidance and ways of setting them up so it's not something they have to struggle with long term anymore is what I'm working on. So I'm like, thank you, because sometimes I feel like, am I not helping my family like I need to? But it's like, all right, there are many other ways.
There's so many creative ways. I always look for ways that are, my principle is simple. I want, highest possible quality of life, less stress so they can enjoy life.
Right.
And then, and so that they're not, burdened by financial stress. To me, that's a biggie for me. Like my mom worried about that when we first came to the States. And once I discovered that, I made sure that, her currency, her sort of love language was helping. And so for her, it was important to that if my brother needed help in any way, shape, or form, that she could give him some money, and that was important to her. So what I did is when I set up her budget, she had zero debt. I mean, she worked as a nursing assistant at St. John's Nursing Home for 20 years. Retired at 70. Didn't make a lot of money, but you wouldn't know that because she had no bills. Because she always lived with us, so never had to pay for anything, and she never got into credit card debt. She had a decent amount of money saved in the bank, so that if my brother ever needed something, God bless the dad, he's passed now. She was able to help him out, or my sister needed something, and didn't have to. And I would manage it a little bit. Like I said, all right, I said, you got to be a little bit thoughtful. I said, spread it out a little bit, and so, but it was really important to her, and so she died happy because she never had worries like that. And she also felt like she could help.
Yeah, and I want to, two things I want to do. We're getting close to coming up on time. So what I want to do with this is like a speed round of questions.
Sure.
But before that, something you pointed out that was a mind blower to me that we definitely should come back to is, and I never equated the two, but I was reading this book that talked about kind of what I just said, is how systemic racism just trickled into like systemic poverty and all the different things like housing, and how that folks have created kind of like the equivalent to whites only without actually saying it. And you see a drip of folks get through that like a slow leak faucet, but it's not a full flow of black and brown folks being able to be into these spaces. And what you just defined that we definitely should do another episode about with the 35%. Has to be, you can only spend up to 35% of your income to live here in the suburbs. But if you go into, let's say, a city, for example, that's not the case, and who that disproportionately affects.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what that was like,
Right.
light bulb moment. So I definitely want to come back to that, and maybe
In fact, that last part there is the reason why disproportionate white families and or people that are not affected by that, right? Because there's some minorities that their income is pretty close to whites, right?
Yeah.
So there are certain demographic groups that are not affected by this issue we're talking about, black and brown specific, right?
Yeah.
So what that tells you with that 35%, that means they have more money available to invest, to save, to buy a house.
Right.
And so it perpetuates this momentum of inequity,
Yeah.
while the opposite is perpetuating the inequity.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. So quick things I just want to run through that all popped up. So would you say, you mentioned a Roth IRA or IRA because I think it's a certain income level for a Roth IRA that you hit, but would you recommend folks get something like that?
Yeah, so Roth IRAs, anybody can really get in a Roth IRA. And all a Roth IRAs is simply is the Roth, like connected with the IRA, is that an IRA is something, the only money can go into an IRA typically is coming out of a 401k or 401(k).
Gotcha.
So money that you put into a vehicle that went in before it was taxed, that's pre-taxed, can only go into typically an IRA. I mean, you could, but then you'd have to pay tax. You can then say, I want to transfer the money from my 401k or 403 into this IRA. A Roth IRA is that I write a check right now and give it to my financial planner to put into my Roth IRA. So you've already paid tax on that money, and the benefit of a Roth IRA is that when you go to take the money out when you retire, you don't pay tax on it.
Is there I thought there was an income limit to that, but there's not income limit.
And again, I'm going to probably qualify this because I'm not being a CFP, but the best of my understanding, anybody can get an Roth IRA. There's usually like a certain amount that you can put in. Like you're limited to how much you can put into a Roth IRA. But I don't believe anybody can't have one. So there's now there may be like a minimum you can put in, but I know there's a maximum. But I would say a CFPP is your best person to ask for. But the Roth IRA, what I can speak to is the fact that it's money you can write a check in today and put a deposit in, and because it's been pre-tax, the government doesn't tax it when you take it out, which means that you put in $100 today, and it gets, I put in $100,000, and it grows 3% a year till I retire. When I go to take it out, I pay no taxes on it. So some people prefer Roth IRAs because you don't know your tax position in the future, and it doesn't matter because you don't pay taxes on it. Right. I'm not from that school of thought. I think what you do is you maximize the pre-tax, right? So your Roth IRA, a 403B, and then if you have extra money, then you can put it into a Roth IRA because you're not getting any taxes on that money. So you get the maximum amount you can put away. It also lowers your taxable position today. And if you make a lot of money, then you can open up an IRA and do some crazy stuff. Okay, good. So last question, because I know we gotta come back for part 2. I think can we just claim it together that it's gonna be a part 2 of this?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, good. So thank you. This is Gems.
No problem.
Jewels all over the place. I see him. Is you mentioned that the housing strategy where you had, I want to buy a house, have my family in it, so we all can have this launching pad.
Yes.
For folks who might have that position, who might be single with no kids and can think about doing something like that, or whatever it is, would you recommend thinking about something like that?
So no one has ever asked me that question because the reason why, like when I decided to do that, it was because, again, coming from that place of scarcity, there's a couple of ways to do it. Everybody go on their own and go do stuff, right? You get less accomplished. Whereas the way by creating this base, but you have to have the family relationship to do that, right? So my agent was right. A multi-family home was better because it allowed me to be able to where, even though I had a good relationship with my mom and my sister, it also created some separation. So I would say if you were able to get a couple of key people in the family and say, let's just buy a multi-family home so that we all help each other out. It's a good strategy to create, and then what you do is then people can either just stay there and pay it off and live for free if it works, or if you say, hey, I've outgrown it, but I'm okay now. So then they can then turn around and then as your family kind of create that sort of consortium, they can rent that out. So then that income goes in and they, can do it a couple of ways. You say, hey, if you can rent out your place after you leave, you keep the rental income, or do you want to put it in a pot and then everybody shares in it? I mean, that's something you can work out. But you can get a lawyer and you can do something like that. I mean, there's no reason why you can't do that. And so right now there's a lot of homes in the city that are very inexpensive. So you could, instead of, for example, you take that person who is working, paying $900 to $1,000 a month for a studio, That's a lot of money. You take 3 people with 3 students, you could literally buy a 3-family.
That's a good point.
You can buy a 3-family because it ain't gonna be $3,000 a month. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So you go from a studio to having a nice 2-bedroom apartment, and you get a house, and then with some of the benefits you have in the city, you could fix up the house, you could do a bunch of stuff, and you get away from that sort of that rental sort of trap.
Yeah, he's like getting out of that race to where it just keeps you. Oh, look. Okay, listen, dang. So, all right. So you brought it up. So you'll be back for another one?
Absolutely. And then I will say too as well that again, I'm not a certified financial planner.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, you're like, man, I don't know if I agree with that. That's okay.
Yeah.
So then get a hold of Herb and Mo and just say, I'd like to come on and drop some like science around the other stuff. This is just my personal journey.
Yeah.
What I learned from other people.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some things that I probably could have done better, but for me, it's the more you share this information, it can percolate. And I always like to steer people back to the professionals because that's So to me, at some point, if you by the time you hit 30 and by the time you hit 35, you should have a CFP that's helping you to build and grow with you your financial plan. And then secondly, to have an accountant that helps you do your taxes.
Right.
So you're not trying to do it yourself. And then having an attorney that helps you with estate planning. Yeah. And doing that before you have, family is really important because then you can grow with them when you do. And then I'll mention this last thing here because it's super important. Long-term care insurance, right? I didn't know anything about it, but when I was at Kodak, they offered it. And I remember signing up for it. And then when I got married, I signed my wife up for it. I still have the same policy. I've left the company in 2006, but I was able to maintain it. Today, you can't even buy that policy anymore. They don't offer it, right? Yeah. But what that does is just make sure that when the time you get to the point where you need nursing care, or skilled nursing, or even assisted living, you have it prepaid for. The policies today, you can find out, shop around. But I mention that because my father-in-law right now is going to be getting ready for us to put him in some assisted living or skilled nursing. When I look at the cost for those things, it could literally destroy your actual plan.
Wow.
Right? It could so therefore you could spend your whole life living, but one of the facilities we looked at is $11,000 a month. Imagine that. I mean, so you basically, and then the papers that you have to fill out, if you have any assets, they're gone by the time you die.
Wow.
So it means if you did all this financial planning stuff and it turns out you have nothing to turn over to your family unless you put it a trust. And there's some creative things. So if you're an attorney listening to this, they're like, oh, if you do estate planning, you can avoid that. So they can't really access your estate. Yeah. But, I believe that's something to explore. Long-term care. It's very, and by the way, when you're younger and it's inexpensive, so imagine this, I'm 58. And my policy for me is $80, $70 a month. For my wife, it's $50, and she's 5 years younger. That's not a lot of money. Yeah. But it would allow me to be in a nursing home today if something happened to me today. Yeah. At full coverage. Wow. And mine's actually for lifetime, but they usually do it for 5 years now or 3 years. Wow. But the point is, if you're young, buying that sort of thing early. Some would argue that, well, boy, what if you never use it? You know what? That's why it's called insurance.
Right.
You hope you ain't got to use it.
You hope you ain't got to use it. But at least if you make it inexpensive,
right?
Then why not? So anyway, sorry, I stopped there. I just thought I'd throw that out.
No, that right there was a gem. I'm about to call my dad and mom right now. Listen, I ain't trying to have to pay for y'all. No, that was good though.
Oh, by the way, so that's something you could subsidize for them.
I'll pay for it.
See, so they say I can't afford to say I will. Ooh. Because I want you to be well taken care of. So creative ways to help your family. Yeah. And then what you have to do is you got to make sure. In fact, my wife and I talk about this a lot, so I don't feel like I'm out there. And I always say, hey, listen, I want this to continue. I said, because if I die. Before I die, I don't want you to be in a position to have to make those decisions. Yeah. So I want that in my will. Yeah. So therefore, when I die, the money I was given, so this relative, that goes right to a trust to go to them. Yeah. Yes. Right. So they're my wife, because if I die early, I'm sure I'll die early because I'm so stressed out all the time doing all this work. so
we don't claim that. No.
So I just want to make sure, I'm like, I'd like you to get married again and be happy, right? Yeah. Don't sit there and go like, oh, I miss Kevin. Like, all right, miss me for a year. Give me at least a year so at least look respectful. Don't be like start dating
3 months.
Like, oh, where you? can you get together after the week? I'm like, oh no, we're heading to France to go shopping. Kevin did a good job.
Oh my God.
And he funded it. Kevin is funding it. Thank you.
He had that this financial plan for me. I said, just like for a year, like date quietly, don't let anybody know.
Then you're good.
And then you can come out going, oh yeah, I met Kevin 2.0.
But I love that. Yeah, well, listen,
You're probably gonna cut that out.
Yeah, we're gonna edit that out, y'all.
Yo, you can keep it in. I don't mind. My wife knows my sense of humor.
Nah, that was good. No, but thank you so much. Listen, we usually say people probably listening right now thinking, wonder what they're talking about. This one, they know what we're talking about. Be on point. And we usually say we might be right,
We might be wrong.
but in this case, we right. But at the end of the day,
We just young, black, and figuring it out.
Tough.
CC on the track, boy.